One of the oldest empires in history, the Persian Empire, has become the present-day country of Iran. Its borders have often changed, but Iran's 80 million inhabitants now live in a country that is 2.5 times the size of France. It's a land of great contrasts, from its mountain ranges in the north to the deserts in the south that stretch all the way down the Persian Gulf. Tabriz, our enchanting gateway into Iran, situated at over 1,300 meters above sea level in the foothills of the Ainali Mountains. It's a city that teems with life and the intense activity of its more than 2 million inhabitants. The riches of this former caravan city rivaled those of Xi'an and Constantinople, so much so that for many centuries Tabriz was known as the capital of the East. The key to Tabriz is business and trade. Its extraordinary covered bazaar is the driving force of the entire city. I've seen many souks and bazaars in my life, but quite frankly, I could never have imagined a place as colossal as this one. It's like a gigantic maze in which one could lose oneself for an entire day. But why do they have such an enormous bazaar? First of all, because Tabriz was the Silk Road's nerve center in Iran. So for centuries, this is where all of the goods converged. But there's another reason, which has to do more with the weather. Most covered bazaars in the Middle East are designed to provide protection from the sun. But here, the winters are so bitter, minus 10 or 20 for weeks on end, that it also has to provide protection from the cold. This huge bazaar covers 36 kilometers of narrow, crowded alleyways, fabulous vaults, and caravanserais. In some areas, it dates back to the 10th century. Its surface is equal to 27 hectares. Exploring it is like visiting an open-air museum that exhibits a little bit of everything, from the downright kitsch to the most exquisite items in a dazzling array of colors, sounds, smells, and above all, good cheer. This surely is the Silk Road. Everything's made in China. For a country in which women are not allowed to show their hair,
Selam aleyküm.
Zımbara koydum, ne diyoruz?
Zinzibar?
O 7 yarımlıklardan mı? O da bak.
yes, this is definitely ginger.
Torcini?
9 tane.
Torcini. Evet.
This here is cinnamon, and the Persian term toshin means Chinese bark. And in fact, historically, it did come from China, both cinnamon and ginger. Everyone has heard of the Silk Road. The popular expression was coined in the 19th century by the German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen. But another term, the spice route, has always given it a good run for its money. And for a good reason. Spices from southern Asia certainly became, over time, one of the biggest items to be traded by the merchants and carried by the caravans along these roads. This is something that has always intrigued me in bazaars all over the world. In Europe, you would never set up shop next to your competitor, while in Eastern bazaars, in the same alleyway, there will be 8 samovar sellers all next to each other. Now we're coming to the porcelain. Porcelain, porcelain, porcelain. It may sound like a bit of a cliche, but except for 1 or 2 light bulbs, it really feels like nothing has changed since Marco Polo's time. And even more so because there are hardly any tourists. I think I've come across maybe 5 Westerners here all day. Each section of the bazaar specializes in a specific item. Here, we're in the caravanserai dedicated to the silk carpets of Tabriz, which are known all over the world for their fine craftsmanship and their elegance. The market that houses the carpet shops is thus one of the most beautiful sections in all of the bazaar, and Iran's historical monuments architect, Dr Faribouz Esmaeli, is especially proud of it. Dr Esmaeli, you're in charge of the restoration work on this bazaar. Can you tell us about its history? Why is it so big?
Many travelers have mentioned this bazaar in their writings at different times in history. One of the most famous travelers who wrote about this bazaar was Marco Polo. He talks about the Tabriz Bazaar, the abundance of its goods, and all of the wonderful spaces that one can find in it. Since Tabriz was at the time the capital of the empire, it was also the central point of the Silk Road in Iran. Not present-day Iran, but ancient Iran, which was a huge empire, and which included countries such as Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, and part of Turkey. In other words, we can say that Tabriz was the commercial hub between those countries. Many travelers who visited this bazaar told people to be careful not to lose their way in this labyrinth, because if you don't pay attention, you could get lost. It's so big.
You mentioned the word labyrinth, yet, for example, in the department stores in Paris, the marketing people create artificial labyrinths on purpose so that people get lost and then buy things they weren't planning to buy. Do you think that here in Tabriz, people in the Middle Ages had already thought of something like that, or is it just a coincidence?
Knowing how smart the people of Tabriz are, they probably did.
Well, there's something that's always intrigued me about these bazaars as compared to Western-style stores. Here, you have all of the competitors grouped together, selling the same things side by side. I was in an aisle over there with 10 guys selling samovars side by side. In this section, they're all selling carpets. Why does everyone set up shop next to their competitors?
I completely agree with you. One feature of Iranian bazaars, and it's been this way for 1,000 years, is that the Iranians understood that it was necessary to sell the same goods in the same place and to create trade guilds.
The guilds certainly have something to do with it, but the very Iranian concept of tarof, or etiquette, must also play a role. According to this legendary art of politeness, a vendor will never solicit a customer who stops in front of a neighbor's stand. Moreover, the trade guilds fix their own selling prices beforehand so as to keep the market stable, a rather opaque system, which, however, has been used for centuries.
Most of the merchants here in the bazaar have owned their shops for many years. They were passed down to them by their fathers and grandfathers. That's one of the reasons why these shop owners care so much about this bazaar, and they've been helping us with the restoration work for many years now.
What renovations are you especially proud of in this bazaar? What do you consider to be some of your major accomplishments here?
I'm very touched by your question. I think that just living and working here is a great honor, and this place always makes me proud. But what we've been able to accomplish in this bazaar, myself, my friends, and the people who work with me, is in fact nothing compared to the bazaar itself. 3 years ago, we received one of the biggest awards given in our profession for restoring the Tabriz Bazaar. What it shows is that the people who are involved in the restoration work here are highly professional and worthy of this place.
I noticed that you drink your tea in a special way, with the sugar cube. Can you show me how you do it?
Yes, of course.
I take one of the sugar cubes, dunk it, and I stick it here. So instead of sweetening the tea, you sweeten the mouth and then put the tea inside.
Right.
خیلی ممنون دکتر. خیلی ممنون.
Marco Polo calls the city Tabriz. He writes that the men here make their living from trade and handicrafts, which are mainly related to the production of textiles. They weave many kinds of beautiful and valuable stuffs of silk and gold. Over the centuries, because of its wealth, Tabriz was often the target of plunderers. The Mongol hordes practically destroyed the city before they took it over. Their reign began in 1229. This imposing citadel is one of the monumental remains that date back to the Ilkhanid dynasty founded by the descendants of Genghis Khan. Built to be a mausoleum, it was later turned into a defensive structure. These walls are 10 meters thick. That gives you an idea of the size of the mosque, which became a citadel built by the Ilkhanids, the kings descended from Genghis Khan, who ruled over Persia. Their massive citadel, however, did not stop Tabriz from being captured and recaptured over the centuries, until the Russians invaded the city in the early 19th century and made Persia sign a treaty which forced it to cede several of its northern provinces, including Georgia and Armenia. We can in fact still see the marks left by the cannonballs when the Russians attacked the city in 1826 and 1911. But it would have taken much more to bring down this stronghold, which is nearly 50 meters high. Tabriz is the epitome of a multi-ethnic city. Marco Polo wrote about it in his account. There are Armenians, Nestorians, Georgians and Persians. There are also worshippers of Mahomet. These latter are the inhabitants of the city and are called Tourizins. Today, the majority of the city's population is Azeri. They speak a variant of the Turkish language. But as we stroll among its streets, we come upon 1,000 little signs that point to the rich diversity of cultures that contributed so significantly to the splendor of Imperial Persia. For example, Armenian culture is still very much alive in Tabriz. I wanted to find out what remained of this community 36 years after the founding of the Islamic Republic. So I went to the heart of the Armenian quarter, located around St. Mary's Church. How are you? Historically, the Armenians were some of the biggest organizers of caravans. They were very active on the Silk Road, where they were often in charge of security. The famous Armenian churches around Tabriz are described in the travels of Marco Polo, including the illustrious St. John's, which was later destroyed by earthquakes. A handful of churches are still standing today, including St. Mary's, which dates from the 18th century. There are still several thousand Armenian families living in Tabriz. Almost all are involved in the retail trade. The city still has 6 churches with active congregations. In fact, the easternmost Christian community along the old caravan route is now found in Tabriz. I wanted to ask the Armenians in Tabriz what it was like for religious minorities living in Iran today. 2 representatives of the community, Karen Sarkisian, an archaeologist, who is also a children's toy shop manager, and Narine Sayedian, a schoolteacher, very graciously welcomed me. Why does Marco Polo talk so much about the Armenians? And on the Silk Road, what role did the Armenians play historically?
At the time, the Armenians were generally involved in trade. Most of them were merchants, and they traveled frequently to Europe, especially in the 13th, 14th and 15th centuries. After the 16th century, the Safavid ruler Shah Abbas made more than 300,000 Armenians migrate from Armenia to Isfahan, so that the number of Armenians in Iran suddenly increased in the early 17th century. Some of those Armenians stayed in Julfa, others went to live in Shiraz, Abadan, Tehran, and Tabriz. Over the next 4 centuries, they continued to migrate in increasing numbers to Iran, and that's why the Armenian population continued to grow. And this, of course, influenced trade, industry and art in the area, because many Armenians were craftsmen or artists. And so we can say that the Armenians of Iran were pioneers in many industrial and artistic fields, for example, in theatre, in painting, in the film industry. And nowadays, anywhere in the country, whenever there is a reference to Armenians, it often has to do with recognizing their arts and their skills, which are highly regarded by everyone.
There is now once again an Armenian homeland, the country of Armenia. Are you tempted to go and live there? Or are there good reasons to remain in the diaspora here in Iran, for example? I'd like to ask Narine, since she represents the younger generation.
I was born in Iran. My family's roots are in Iran. In other words, my father and my grandparents were born here, just like me. And our roots are here. It's true that Armenia is the land of our ancestors, and I do sincerely love it with all my heart. But since we can freely practice all of our religious activities here without any problem, in other words, in Iran we're allowed to enjoy all of those benefits. We have our own establishments, our own gyms, so we don't feel like outsiders. We feel at home here in Iran, in Tabriz.
You say that tolerance and religious freedom exists here in Iran, but how, as a teacher, do you explain to the girls in your classes, who are Armenians, in an Armenian school, that they have to wear a veil? If they were in Armenia, but not only, in Iraq or Syria as well, they wouldn't have to wear a veil nowadays. How do you explain it?
In terms of how we dress, as an Iranian woman, one of the laws of the Islamic Republic is that girls from the age of 10 must wear the hijab, the veil. They must cover themselves. Since we have always lived here, and have thus grown up with these customs, wearing the veil seems very normal to us. We're used to wearing the veil outside of the house, whether at school or at the university. But when we're in our own establishments, in our own circles, we're free, and there's no obligation to cover our hair or to wear a coat. Amongst ourselves, we're completely free. We can walk around freely, let down our hair, wear makeup. Girls and boys are allowed to mingle, to play together, to play basketball or ping pong. We can sit together in cafes, talk about anything. There are no restrictions. But outside of our own establishments, we have to respect the Islamic law.
The writer Nicolas Bouvier lived for several long winter months in this Armenistan area of Tabriz in the early 1950s. He describes his travels along the Silk Road in what has since become a cult book entitled The Way of the World. Over the centuries, Tabriz was chosen several times to be the capital of the Persian Empire, or at least the capital for the local dynasties, for example, during the reign of the Kara Koyunlu, the Timurid Turkmen, who were the descendants of Tamerlan. The famous Blue Mosque of Tabriz was built under their dynasty in the middle of the 15th century. Perhaps they wanted to build this masterpiece of architectural elegance in order to make up for the terrible destruction wrought by Timur, known as Tamerlan, the fearsome conqueror who razed and slaughtered his way across Asia. This Blue Mosque, which is famous throughout the East for its mosaics, prefigures the architectural splendors of the Persian style, the style of Shia Islam. The Shiite minority represents approximately 10% of the 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. Unlike the Sunnis, the Shiites have an institutionalized clergy and are especially devoted to Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. Controlling a section of the Silk Road was a profitable business providing a guaranteed income from duties and taxes. However, in return, the safety of the merchants passing through had to be ensured, which led to the creation of caravanserais, literally caravan palaces in the Persian language. I'm clapping my hands just in case because it's very green here and there's water, so it's exactly the kind of place where snakes might be hiding out. Other than that, it's gorgeous. What's astonishing about Iran is that you're always coming upon something totally unexpected. We're in the middle of a completely arid landscape, and then we come to a little valley. And there you find this typical Qanat system of irrigation that creates a little green oasis full of fields. And on the edge of the fields, there are huge wild rose bushes. They may not look like the kind of roses we're used to seeing, but the scent of roses is just amazing. The Qanats, or irrigation canals, invented by the Persians 3,000 years ago, are still maintained with great care because the most precious resource in this area is water. In these tiny villages out in the middle of nowhere, life is tough. There is only one old Turkmen farmer who lives here all year long. He is, with his sickle, the guardian of tradition, the last of his kind. Jamal Abad is a typical example of the old caravanserais. The history of this palace of trade goes back to the Achaemenid dynasty, which ruled this entire part of Asia 23 centuries ago, until Alexander the Great vanquished Darius, the king of kings of the Persian Empire. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us that the Achaemenid emperors built 111 caravanserais along a 2,500-kilometer stretch of the ancient caravan route that would go on to become the Silk Road. We can see the traditional caravanserai layout here, a large courtyard enclosed on three sides by blind walls, with a big entrance on one of the sides. In the middle was the water cistern, and well, here we have the old cistern on the left, and then the modern cistern on the right. And all around were the alcoves, the merchants' lodgings, and then behind you had the stables for the horses or camels. What is quite striking is the simple symmetry of the lines in such a functional building, as well as how cool it is inside. It's almost as if Plato's theory of ideal forms were embodied in this structure, which harmoniously combines the beautiful, the good, and the true. Far out in the middle of the steppe lies the little town of Sultaniye, and the reason the Mongol conquerors chose it to be their capital might seem rather surprising. It was for its grass. But we must remember that these nomadic warriors relied heavily on their cavalry, and so they needed good pasture land to feed their thousands of horses. It was the Mongol Ilkhan Oljeto who started building this mausoleum here in 1302. He wanted it to be a shrine for the remains of Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, and the holiest figure in Shia Islam. Its size and ornamentation would make it the most exceptional monument of its time, but Ali's ashes never came to Sultaniye. They remained in Iraq, in Najaf, where they can still be found today. So Oljeto decided to make this edifice his own tomb. It's one of the oldest double-shelled domes in the world, along with the Duomo in Florence and the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. This mausoleum, with its incredibly audacious architecture, is said to have inspired the Taj Mahal. The craftsmen who worked on the mosaics in this mausoleum used two different techniques. The first, which we can see here, was a little like the stained glass technique, cutting out shapes that were then pasted together to create a pattern. The second technique, up here, which was faster, consisted of painting directly onto the ceramic. If Ali's ashes had been moved here, a huge city would have undoubtedly sprung up and taken over these meadows and fields around Sultaniye. Instead, it ended up being all but forgotten by the world. But in 2005, the sleepy little town on the old Silk Road finally had the immense satisfaction of seeing its mausoleum designated as a World Heritage Site.